I'm attorney Renee Osipov with Chelle Law, and we assist parents, guardians, and students who are having issues surrounding 504 plan. In this video, I'm discussing within the context of Michigan, what are some useful guidelines within 504 plan and accommodations. So first, let's discuss 504 plans and what are they. So 504 plans are actually codified in federal statutes, specifically the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504. Now, in that federal statute, 504 plans and their accommodations therein are put in place to protect individuals who have a disability from discrimination within the classroom or the confines of the educational institution. So a couple of things to remember: 504 plans or accommodations can include anything within the environment of the school. So this can mean the general education classroom, it can mean transition between classes, transportation to and from school, cafeteria, extracurricular activities. All of those things can be included in a 504 plan. So we're going to remember those sort of building blocks as we're going through the useful guidelines. So some other useful things to remember, just some suggestions. In my opinion, if you feel that your child may have some type of disability or you think that they may need some accommodation, you first want to look at the definition within the 504 statute. And so what that says is that in order for a child to qualify for 504 plan accommodations, they have to have some type of physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So what does this look like? This means that the child can have any diagnosis. Now, this is different than an IEP. IEP, a child may have to have a qualifying disability within the 13 categories that the federal statutes for that lay out. But with a 504 plan, you're not limited. So it can really be any type of diagnosis, any disability, anything that just mentally or physically impairs the student. Now, the second part, though, that you want to remember is that just because you have a diagnosis, it doesn't mean that accommodations will be granted. That diagnosis or that disability has to substantially limit a major life activity. So it's like something in the classroom. So this could be physical. So they may have a difficulty with parts of their body functioning in the classroom or transitioning. So what would this look like? Maybe a child is in a wheelchair. They need OT therapy, physical therapy, things like that. Or it may be a mental impairment, so anxiety disorders, ODD, ADHD, ADD, all of those things. If it's substantially limiting the student's ability to learn within the classroom, then the 504 plan accommodations would then come into play and they would likely be eligible. So when we're talking about guidelines or useful things to remember, if you think that your child is having difficulties in school and you think that there may be some type of impairment, in my opinion, I suggest going to your healthcare provider first and actually getting some type of diagnosis. That's where I would start, because if you just go to the school and say, my child has this impairment, if there's no diagnosis, the school does have types of therapists and sometimes psychologists and things like that that can potentially diagnose, but it's difficult, especially if it's something physical where you really need your, primary care provider or pediatrician or specialist to diagnose. But actually start there. Once you get that diagnosis or impairment from your healthcare provider, then that's when I would notify the school that you would like to have 504 plan accommodations. Then the school is going to send this information to the 504 plan coordinator team, which also includes parents or guardians. This is also another thing that's really important to learn or to know, that parents are involved. You do have a say-so in what goes into that plan. So the team will assemble and then they're going to look at the data. So they're going to look at the diagnosis from your healthcare provider, likely, or therapist. Then they're going to likely speak with the general education teacher If the child's in special education, it's likely that they already have an IEP. But if there's some other accommodations that are needed that wouldn't be covered under the IEP, that special education teacher or coordinator can also show those data and observations. So then the team comes together, they look at the data, they look at the observations and say, yes, the student, this impairment is really substantially limiting their ability to learn within the classroom, or transition between classes, or participate in extracurricular activities, or eat lunch in the cafeteria. So once that happens, so the child would then qualify, the team would meet again, and then they would decide on the accommodations. Another useful tip that I always recommend is that when the accommodations are getting created or they're drafting them, it's really important that whoever is doing it does it in a way that whoever in the school, from the teacher to a substitute teacher, admin staff, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, anybody who grabs that 504 plan can look at it, read that accommodation, and know exactly how to implement it. So some examples, if a substitute comes in and they're giving an exam, if the accommodations just simply states that the child receives extra time on the exam, well, how much extra time? Can the child literally stay there all day and work on that exam? We don't know. Better way to write that, a more useful way for everybody, including the student, is that the student either gets double the time or triple the time, or it would specify 1 hour, 2 hours, something like that. So if anybody picks it up who's, qualified, so we have a substitute teacher, admin staff, anybody, they can read that accommodation and know exactly how to implement it. The other useful sort of tip and guidelines that I would also suggest whenever you're creating accommodations, you want to remember that this child may have some type of anxiety or just a realization that they may learn in a different way or process things in a different way. And that can be stressful to them. And no child really wants to be singled out for having any type of impairment within the classroom. And it can actually really be detrimental to them. So when the accommodations are getting drafted, another useful suggestion I have is that there's a way that the student can clue in the teacher or whoever, staff at the school, that the accommodation or intervention or something like that needs to come into play. So let me give you an example. If a child has an impairment of anxiety, it substantially limits them within the classroom. They may be having panic attacks. They don't want to give oral presentations, things like that. There's a way to clue into the teacher that they need that accommodation. So a lot of times it will say that either the student will indicate a code word to the teacher. They may raise their hand with a thumbs up or like a number 2 or number 1, something like that. It clues in the teacher that this child needs that accommodation. So they give that signal, that thumbs up, the teacher sees that, and just, then they can clue in the student and just say, okay, you may go. Maybe code word sometimes is you need to use the restroom or you need to go get a drink. And then they can go to seclusion or, somewhere away from the classroom where they can self-regulate, or there may be an individual that's designated within the school that they can go to that can help regulate their emotions and distress so that they can calm down and then enter back into the classroom. The other useful thing that I want to point out that I think is overlooked a lot in 504 plans is everything outside of the general education classroom. So the biggest one that I have seen, especially with students who have issues with disciplinary problems when they're overstimulated, is the cafeteria, lunchtime. If there's any sort of sensory processing disorders, the cafeteria is extremely overstimulating. The smells, which a lot of people don't think about, the noise of the sheer amount of students, talking about their day, teachers, discussing things with other staff, cafeteria workers talking. So the noise level is very high. Lots of smells crammed into, a large area, but there's so many students that they're cramped, they're moving fast, or they're waiting in line for long periods of times. It can really be sensory overload. So If you are seeing that your, child is having issues around cafeteria or lunchtime, I really recommend that some type of accommodation is written in to accommodate them. And so what would that look like? Maybe they're allowed to sit in a special spot in the cafeteria if they feel comfortable. Maybe they're allowed to eat in a different location than the actual cafeteria itself. Maybe they have a peer or a buddy, sort of like a buddy system that they can sit next to, something like that. There are, the possibilities are really endless for accommodations, but you want to just make sure that it's tailored to meet that student's needs, and it can really be anything within the confines of the school. So again, extracurricular activities, that's a big one. If they need any accommodations, transitions between classes, do they need a buddy to go with? Do they need to be escorted by aides or staff members? Are they allowed prompt time before they leave? So the teacher notifies the student, okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to be transitioning to, and then, explain. So that just kind of leads me into the last sort of useful guideline or tip that you want to remember. There's no check the boxes on a 504 plan. You can really get very creative. It's important, though, to fully understand what's causing the impairments that the student is having within the school so that you can detail that accommodation to meet their needs. And don't be scared to speak up if you're a parent. Get creative, ask questions. You have a say. You are an equal member on that team. And so you know your child best. So speak up for them, advocate for them, and think about it broadly within the whole aspect of the school, from the time they leave the door to the time they come back in the afternoon. If you have any more questions, you can check out our website or schedule a consultation with us. We're happy to review your 504 plan or advise you on how to request one and the process. Everything is in the description below this video, and we're here to help.